Hi, I'm Scott for ediblemusic.com. I want to help you out with some potential confusion that you might have when you're working with send and return channels. All of a sudden, you've got two volume parameters that you need to adjust and keep track of. There's the send level that might look like a dial, it might be a fader depending on the workstation that you're using. But that adjusts how much signal is going into the return channel, and then the return channel also has a fader. So which one of these are you supposed to be focusing on while you're working? This will be something that is especially useful if you're working with samples or virtual instruments, and you'll see in a minute how to make sure that you've got a steady level throughout. Now I wanted to use a really straightforward example, so I sat down and I hit a snare drum a few times. Here it is. Now I'm sending that to the return channel. And it's an exact copy. If we reduce how much it's sending, it's like a quieter version of it. But this is where I think the confusion comes in, is because you're wondering, should I send only a little bit of it? What happens if I send all of it and max it out? What happens then? So I'll show you what happens. And I'll show you first with Ableton's Reverb. Sounds the same, right? This plugin, the wizards over at Ableton designed it flexibly so that if there's only a little bit of gain coming into it, or if there's a lot of gain coming into it, the plugin will handle it the same regardless. And then all you'll have to do is to adjust the return channel fader afterwards to determine how much of that reverb you'd like to add into your mix. This is a little bit different usually for plugins that are modeled after analog hardware. Because the hardware has circuits and transistors and all these wires and plates and stuff like that inside of them, they'll be very sensitive to how much sound is coming through them. And this is a useful thing for things like saturators, because you want to kind of push them a little bit and get that little bit of spice in there from them. So I'd like to show you an example of that using Arturia's plate reverb, which I've been really enjoying lately. And the wizards over at Arturia modeled this after a hardware plate, so it will be more sensitive to how much gain is coming through. It's pretty slight with this plugin, the differences, but I want to see if you can listen to kind of the smack of the snare drum and how that changes depending upon how much level is going into the plugin. This is it maxed out. Really different, right? Or at least a little bit different, noticeably different. And this can be really important, especially on plugins that are intended to be sensitive to how much gain is coming into them, like saturation or compression. If you have processing on the snare track as well, say some EQ or some compression before you send it over to a reverb channel, well, those plugins too might be sensitive to how much gain is coming into them. So if you have, if you were using a kick sample or something like that, or a synth or a wavetable, but it's cranked all the way up, then the compressor is going to hate it. it's not gonna enjoy the sound that's coming into it, and then that issue is just going to maintain no matter where you send it. if you send it into some more plugins, when you send it to the master channel, you send it to a reverb channel. That's going to create a lot of problems with trying to balance your mix, because it's causing a lot of trouble with the plugins themselves. Now this is where it becomes especially useful for those of you who are working with samples or virtual instruments, because when you're scrolling through them and trying to find the right choice, usually many of them will be all the way up in volume because they want you to pick them, so they're trying to raise their hand and get your attention. But that's not actually helpful when you want to mix them into the song, because as you've seen, if there's too much level coming into a plugin, it can start doing things that you don't actually want the plugin to do. It stops helping. So what do? Samples are great, virtual instruments are great, but the best thing that you can do is to start at the very beginning, at the clip gain or sample gain. If you get that to be at about a -12, -10-ish volume, then it'll interact really nicely with not only the plugins that you put on to the track itself, but also with the send and return channels that you might be sending it to for some extra effects. So if you start at the clip, at the instrument, at the recording level, get that so that the volume is coming out of the track at about -10-ish, -12-ish, then that'll carry through really nicely from not only the plugins that you put onto the track, but then also it'll be a relatively steady signal through the return channels and all the way to the master. So if you do that, I think that you'll find that it will probably have a nice effect on your mixes. So give it a shot, let me know how it goes, and have fun.